We're solving first by factoring. The first few I've actually factored for you, and you just have to set each one of those factors equal to 0. So you would say a minus 8 equals 0, and you would say 3a plus 8 equals 0. And then you're just solving, basic equation solving like we did at the beginning of the year. So a is going to equal 8, and then subtract 8. 3a equals negative 8, divide by 3, a equals negative 8/3. So 2 answers, set each one equal to 0. That is solving by factoring. And then you have some where you have to factor and then do exactly what we just did. Now, they have to be equal to 0 for factoring. So when it's not equal to 0 like this one, then we have to move that over, all right? Remember, when it goes across the equal, it changes signs. And so now we have m squared minus 12m plus 32 equals 0. And so we have to go back to our factoring rules and say, well, now I need factors of 32 that add up to give me 12, right? And so it's either positive, positive, or negative, negative. In this case, negative, negative. So I'm going to say m minus 8, m minus 4 equals 0. And you can double check. Negative 8 plus negative 4 is negative 12. Negative 8 times negative 4 is positive 32. And so we know that's correct. And then we have exactly what we had above there. We set each factor equal to 0. And then we solve, just like basic solving that we did at the very beginning. So m is going to equal 8 or 4. I do have a little bit more factoring for you. I'm not going to give you huge numbers, all right? If you see huge numbers, what are you probably going to divide out? Common factor, right? So if you see really huge numbers for factoring, you may want to take a step back and say, she's probably not going to give me huge numbers. Let's see if something can come out of all of it, all right? When I look at something like this, not huge numbers, but I can't just break it down like I just did. It is equal to 0, but I do have to do the process where I multiply across. So 3 times 12 is 36. I now need factors of 36 that add up to give me 13, right? And so negative 9 and negative 4, those add up to give me negative 13. Those multiply to give me positive 36. And so remember, I'm going to break this up. I'm going to keep the 3n squared. This negative 13 will become a negative 9 and a negative 4n. So negative 9n, negative 4n. And then I'm going to leave the 12 alone, plus 12. And now I'm going to do my factor by grouping. So group the first two, group the second two. I grouped behind a negative, so that means I need to change this sign right here. And then I'm going to just use common factors for each group. So I look at the 3 and the 9, and I see a 3 can come out. N squared and n, I can take one n out. I'm left with n minus 3. Bring down this minus sign. Between the 4n and the 12, I can take a 4 out, and I'm left with n minus 3. Then I am going to take that group and say, okay, this group is in common, so that's going to be one of my groups. What's left over, 3n minus 4, will be my other group. And then this looks like the very first problem we did. It's factored. I'm going to set each factor equal to 0. The n minus 3 equals 0. The 3n minus 4 equals 0. And then I'm just going to solve those. N is going to equal 3 from that first group. Add 4. Divide by 3. N is going to equal 4/3 from the second group. You can have a straight square root where it's just something squared and the number. And if you're already here, you already have the variable squared by itself. You literally take the square root of both sides. That will get the m by itself. But remember, when I'm talking about roots with a variable involved, I need the positive and negative root. And this one actually has a root, right? The square root of 4 is 2. But I have to remember it is positive or negative 2. And that's all I have to do when it looks like that. For the next one, it's a little more difficult because the x squared, or the a squared in this case, is not by itself. So I need to get it by itself. I need to subtract that 8 over. So I have a squared, 8a squared equals, and then I'm going to subtract, all right? And so we want to subtract out 672 minus 8. All right? And then I want to, one more step before I take the square root, I need to divide, right? So I'm going to divide by this 8. You can do long division. You can do 8 into 66. That goes 8 times with 2 left over. 8 into 24, 3. And then I'm ready to take the square root. For something like this, 83 doesn't have a perfect root, and you cannot simplify it. So had it been something like 12, I can simplify 12. 2 and 6, 2 and 3. A 2 will come out, a 3 will stay in. You want to do your factor tree if you can, but in this case, nothing simplifies. So my a is just going to equal the positive and negative root of 83, because 83 does not have a perfect root, and I cannot simplify it. I actually pulled 2 different ones. One that's going to give you a whole number, or integers rather, and one that will give you a radical, all right? So when you're doing completing the square, this is the one time you don't have to have it equal to 0, right? You actually want the variable squared and the variable by itself and the number on the other side. So I'm going to start by moving this 24 over to the other side. And I'm going to say p squared minus 10p on this side, and because I moved it over, I have a negative 24 on that side. All right? And then I'm going to take that middle number, that b, and I'm going to cut it in half. That is going to give me negative 5. This negative 5 tells me how I'm going to actually factor, right? But to tell me what's going to add to both sides, I have to square it. All right? So I have to square it. So I end up adding 25 to both sides. All right? So what I mean by it tells you how to factor, I'm going to break this up into a group squared. That group will always be that variable in whatever I had here. That was a negative 5. It's going to be a minus 5 squared. All right? And then here I just add negative 24 plus 5 is just 1. I'm ready to take the square root because I have the group squared by itself. So square root here, square root here. On the left, I have just p minus 5. And on the right, I have the square root of 1. The square root of 1 is just 1, but it is positive or negative 1, right? When you have something like this, a perfect root, you need to keep going and actually do the problem. So it's going to be p minus 5 equals the positive 1, and p minus 5 equals the negative 1. And then I'm just going to solve it by adding that 5. So p will equal 6 or 4. All right, so that's one thing that can happen when you're completing the square. You have nice integers. If you look at 44, 44 is a little bit different. For starters, I already have a number on the other side. All right, so I am going to start by moving this 15 over. It's going to be a minus 15 over there. So I have x squared plus 10x on this side. And I have negative 3 minus 15. That is negative 18 on that side. All right. And then I'm going to do exactly the same thing. It actually ends up being very similar. It's a positive 10 this time, divided by 2. That gives me a positive 5. But when I square it again, I'm going to add 25 to both sides. Once again, I have to factor, but I already know what that factoring looks like. It's the variable with a positive 5, and that is squared. Over here, I have negative 18 and positive 25. That's going to give me a 7. I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So I have on the left the x plus 5, and on the right I have the positive or negative square root of 7. This guy does not have a perfect root. So my answer is going to look like something with a radical in it. I need to still move the 5 over because I try to get the x by itself. So it's x. When I moved it over, remember it changes signs because I had to subtract it. I have the plus or minus square root of 7. These are not like terms. I cannot simplify the 7. This is my answer. I'm just going to leave it like this. Negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 7. I am done. So the key to doing quadratic formula is to know the quadratic formula, all right? So if you don't know the quadratic formula, listen to the song, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. This is what x equals. You should not have any variables in your quadratic formula. It is all numbers, okay? So knowing the quadratic formula, very important too. It has to be equal to 0, all right? So 49 is already equal to 0. 53 is not equal to 0. So I have to make sure it's equal to 0 or my A, B, and C are going to be wrong when I go do this, all right? So 49 is already equal to 0. My A is 8. My B, what's in front of that X if I don't see anything? A 1, so my B is 1, and my C is negative 2, all right, negative 2. So negative B just means the opposite. I have a plus 1 as my B. I'm going to make that a negative 1, so negative 1 plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C, all over 2 times A. All right, a couple things here that I noticed on the quiz. When you have a negative in that A or C, then it's going to be a plus in that middle. Because if you'll notice, I have minus right here, and I have a negative here. So when I have 4 times 8, that's 32, times negative 2, that's negative 64, but I'm subtracting a negative, right? All right, so when you have another negative in here, this is going to end up changing to plus because it's minus a negative, right? And so some of you didn't do that, and you kind of confused yourself because you had a negative in the root, and you knew that wasn't right, okay? And so just pay attention when you have like a negative C, that's going to end up being a plus. So for this one, I have negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 1, and then 4 times 8 is 32, times negative 2 is negative 64, but I'm subtracting a negative, so plus 64, right? Plus 64 all over 16. All right, so just make sure that when you do your positives and negatives, you pay attention to that. And then our last step is to simplify if we can. We have negative 1 plus or minus the square root. 1 plus 64 is 65, all over 16. If you were to do factor tree, that's 5 and 13. So 65 does not simplify. There's nothing you can do to take it out. We're actually done. This is our answer. The first thing you'll notice here is that it is not equal to 0. Do not do your A, B, and C until it is equal to 0 because it'll change your A, B, and C. And so the first thing I'm going to do here is move that 4 over. It's a positive 4. I need to subtract it here. All right, so I have 7x squared plus 6x minus 11 equals 0. All right, so now I have my A, B, and C, and I'm ready to do my quadratic formula with my A, my B, and my C. So I have negative b plus or minus the square root of my b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. All right, leave the negative 6. 6 squared is 36. It's going to be a plus 308 all over 14. So we're going to add these. If I add my 308 and my 36, make it, yep, there we go. And then 344 is something that I'm going to be able to simplify. It's not pretty, but I'm going to be able to simplify him. He's big. So just take them one at a time. So we're going to take 344 and use our factor tree, right? And I actually think that's as far as it goes because the rest of it is going to stay in. He can't go any further, all right? So 43 is prime. So I'm going to simplify this one to take a 2 out, and the 2 and the 43 stay in. So I have negative 6 rather, plus or minus, I brought a 2 out, and I have an 86 that stays in, and I have a 14. All right? When I am looking to see if I can reduce, I cannot just reduce 2 of them. I have to look at every single number that's on the outside. The 6 is on the outside, the 2 is on the outside, the 14 is on the outside. And something has to go into all 3 of those. Like on your quiz, some of y'all had like a 3 and a 1 here and a 6 on bottom. And you reduced your 3 and your 6, and you cannot do that, all right? It has to come out of all 3 of these. And so I do have a number that comes out of all 3 of them. A 2 can come out of all of them. And some of you did it twice. It actually only comes out of it once. So a 2 comes out of all of these one time. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 14 divided by 2 is 7. All right? You take a 2 out of all of them at one time. And then once you do that, you can rewrite him. So I have a negative 3 plus or minus. You can put the 1 there. You don't have to. Square root of 86 all over 7. And that is my answer. That's as simple as I can get it.